The crystal wine glass in my hand trembled slightly as I stared across our mahogany dining table at my stepmother, Victoria. The perfectly cooked salmon on my plate suddenly tasted like a cardboard. "You did what?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Victoria dabbed at her lips with a linen napkin, her red lipstick leaving a perfect mark. "Really, Charlotte, don't be dramatic. La Maison was dragging down the family's portfolio. I found buyers who'll probably turn it into one of those trendy fusion places." She waved her hand dismissively. "They're paying well above market value." My name is Charlotte Durant, and at 28, I was watching my stepmother of 3 years casually destroy my mother's legacy. La Maison wasn't just a restaurant, it was my childhood, my heritage, and the last real connection I had to my mother who had passed away 5 years ago. "Dad," I turned to my father, who was suddenly very interested in cutting his salmon into increasingly smaller pieces. "You can't let her do this. Mom built that restaurant from nothing. It's been in our family for 30 years. The decision's made, Charlie," he said softly, still not meeting my eyes. "Victoria's right. The restaurant's profits have been declining. Sometimes we have to make hard business decisions." I felt the familiar anger rise in my chest. Ever since he'd married Victoria, my father had become a shadow of himself, deferring to her on everything from family holidays to business decisions. The successful restaurateur who had supported my mother's dreams was gone, replaced by a man who seemed afraid of his own wife. "Hard business decisions," I repeated, "like selling a property you don't even own." La Maison was left to me in Mom's will. Victoria's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose slightly. "Actually, dear, your father maintained controlling interest as executor of the estate until you turned 30. We're well within our rights to sell." I set down my wine glass carefully, afraid I might shatter it in my grip. She was right. My mother's will had stipulated that my father would manage the restaurant until I turned 30, thinking he would protect it, nurture it, keep it running until I was ready to take over completely. What my mother hadn't anticipated was Victoria Torres, the glamorous real estate agent who had swept into our lives 3 years after her death, bringing with her an aggressive approach to modernizing our family's assets. "When?" I asked, proud of how steady my voice remained. "The new owners take possession next Friday," Victoria replied, taking a delicate sip of her wine. "They're paying cash, so the closing is expedited. I'll need you to handle the staff notifications and inventory clearance." Of course she would. Victoria always managed to delegate the unpleasant tasks to me, all while maintaining her image as the efficient, business-savvy stepmother who was just looking out for the family's interests. I pushed back my chair and stood up. "If you'll excuse me, I've lost my appetite." "Charlotte." My father finally looked up, his face lined with guilt. "Try to understand. The restaurant, it's not what it used to be. Your mother wouldn't want you tied to a failing business." I stared at him, remembering all the nights he and Mom had spent planning menus, selecting wines, building La Maison into one of the most respected French restaurants in Boston. How quickly he'd forgotten. "No," I said quietly. "Mom wouldn't want me to give up without a fight." I walked out of the dining room, Victoria's voice floating after me. "Really, Charles, I don't know why she's being so difficult about this. It's just a restaurant." Just a restaurant. As if La Maison could be reduced to mere brick and mortar, to profit margins and market value. She had no idea what that place really meant, what secrets it held. I drove through the rain-slicked streets of Boston to La Maison, using my key to enter through the kitchen door. The restaurant was closed on Mondays, and the familiar space was dark and quiet. I moved through the kitchen, running my hand along the stainless steel counters where I'd learned to cook at my mother's side. The main dining room was bathed in soft light from the street lamps outside, illuminating the hand-painted murals my mother had commissioned, scenes of the French countryside where she'd grown up. Each table was still perfectly set, white tablecloths gleaming, wine glasses sparkling. Victoria might see a failing business, but I saw decades of memories, of passion, of love. I made my way to the wine cellar door, hidden behind a vintage French poster. The heavy wooden door creaked slightly as I opened it, the temperature dropping as I descended the stone steps. This was where my mother had worked her real magic. The main wine cellar was impressive enough. Hundreds of bottles carefully cataloged and stored at perfect temperature. But it was the secret room behind the false wall that held La Maison's true treasure. My mother had started collecting rare wines in her 20s, long before she met my father. Over the years, she had amassed a collection that would make wine connoisseurs weep. I pressed the hidden latch and the false wall swung open silently. The room beyond was smaller, but every bottle here was worth more than most people made in a year. Chateau Lafayette Rothschild, 1869. Roman et Conti, 1945. Chateau Latour, 1961. My mother had collected them all. The entire collection was worth millions, but its existence was known only to me and Jean-Luc, our ancient sommelier who had worked with my mother for decades. We had kept it secret, protected it, waiting for the right moment to reveal its true value. That moment, it seemed, had arrived sooner than expected. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I'd memorized but never used. After 3 rings, a familiar French-accented voice answered. "Ah, Charlotte, I was wondering when you would call." "Marcus," I said, "I need your help. It's time to make good on that promise you made to my mother." Marcus Durand had been my mother's mentor in her early days as a wine collector. Now he was one of the most respected wine authenticators in the world. "The collection?" he asked. "Is it at risk?" "Victoria's selling the restaurant. We have less than a week." He was quiet for a moment. "I can be there tomorrow morning. Have Jean-Luc prepare the documentation." After hanging up, I sent a text to Jean-Luc. "It's happening. Meet me at the restaurant tomorrow at 8 a.m. Then I sat down on the cool stone floor, surrounded by millions of dollars worth of wine, and finally let myself cry. Not just for the restaurant, but for my mother, for the legacy she'd built, for the father who seemed to have forgotten what any of it meant. My phone buzzed. A text from my best friend and La Maison's head chef. "Sophie, just heard from the staff. That witch is really selling us out." "Not if I can help it," I replied. "Meeting tomorrow at 8 a.m. We're activating Plan B." Sophie and I had been preparing for something like this ever since Victoria had started making noise about streamlining the family's assets. We had backups of all the restaurant's records, copies of my mother's original recipes, and most importantly, a list of loyal customers who would be very interested to learn about Victoria's plans. I stood up, brushing off my pants and taking one last look at the hidden wine room. My mother had always said that timing was everything, in cooking, in wine, in life. Victoria thought she was selling a failing restaurant. She had no idea she was about to uncork a vintage scandal. The next morning, La Maison's kitchen was alive with tension. Sophie stood at her usual place by the stove, but instead of preparing for service, she was reviewing documents with Jean-Luc. Marcus had arrived from New York, his expert's eye already gleaming at the prospect of examining the collection. "The documentation is perfect," Jean-Luc said, his weathered hands smoothing out the papers on the steel prep table. "Your mother kept records of every purchase, every authentication. The provenance is undeniable." Marcus nodded, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "And you've maintained perfect temperature control?" "The humidity levels." "Exactly as Madame Durand specified," Jean-Luc replied. "For 25 years, I have not deviated from her instructions by even 1 degree." "Then let's see them," Marcus said. I led the small group down to the cellar, watching their faces as I revealed the hidden room. Even Sophie, who had known about its existence, gasped at the sight of so many legendary wines in one place. Marcus moved through the collection with reverence, examining bottles, checking labels, making notes. After an hour, he turned to me with an expression of barely contained excitement. "Charlotte, this is extraordinary. The 1869 Lafayette alone would fetch over $230,000 at auction. The entire collection." He paused, making some quick calculations. "Conservatively, we're looking at $8 to $10 million. Sophie whistled softly. "No wonder your mother kept this secret." "And the buyers Victoria found," I said. "They have no idea this exists." "Impossible," Jean-Luc scoffed. "The false wall does not appear in any building plans. Only those Madame trusted knew of its existence." I smiled grimly. "Perfect. Sophie, is everyone here?" She nodded. "The whole staff is waiting upstairs. They're scared, Charlotte. This place is their home too." We gathered in the main dining room. The servers, line cooks, dishwashers, everyone who had helped make La Maison special. Many had worked here for decades, hired by my mother when the restaurant was just starting out. "I know you're worried," I began, looking at their familiar faces. "But I promise you, La Maison isn't going anywhere. Victoria thinks she's selling a struggling restaurant. What she doesn't know is that we're about to make her an offer she can't legally refuse. I explained the plan, watching hope replace fear in their eyes. By the time I finished, there was a new energy in the room, a sense of purpose. "What do you need us to do?" Maria, our longest-serving server, asked. "For now, business as usual, but be ready. When this breaks, it's going to get complicated." The next few days were a blur of preparation. Marcus worked with an art security firm to document and value every bottle. Jean-Luc compiled years of temperature and humidity logs. Sophie coordinated with our suppliers and regular customers, ensuring everyone was prepared for what was coming. The night before the sale was set to close, I sat in my mother's old office, looking at her photograph on the wall. She was standing in front of La Maison on opening night, young and beautiful and full of dreams. My phone buzzed. Victoria calling for the third time that day. I let it go to voicemail, already knowing what she wanted. She'd been trying to get me to sign some last-minute paperwork, probably trying to legally protect herself. The next morning, I arrived at the restaurant early. Victoria was already there with the buyers, a pair of sleek entrepreneurs in expensive suits who looked like they'd never worked in a kitchen in their lives. "Charlotte," Victoria said with fake warmth. "Good you're here. We just need your signature on a few things before we finish up." I smiled, setting my briefcase on one of the dining tables. "Actually, I have something you all need to see first." The buyers looked confused as Marcus and Jean-Luc entered, carrying stacks of documentation. Victoria's smile faltered slightly. "What's this about?" "We have a closing scheduled." "Yes," I cut her off. "About that. Did you disclose the wine cellar in the sale documents?" She waved dismissively. "Of course. The wine inventory is included." "Not that wine cellar," I said quietly. "The other one." The color drained from her face as I led everyone downstairs. The buyers' expressions changed from annoyance to amazement as the hidden room was revealed. Marcus began his presentation, discussing the value and rarity of each bottle. "This collection," he concluded, "represents one of the finest private wine collections in the world. Its total value exceeds $9 million. Victoria's perfectly manicured hands were shaking. "This is ridiculous." Charles never mentioned. "Because he didn't know," I said. "Mom kept this separate from the family assets. It belongs solely to me, as specified in a separate trust document." I pulled out the paperwork my mother's lawyer had helped me locate. "If you sell La Maison, you're also liable for the value of this collection, which was never included in the sale price." The buyers were already backing away, realizing the deal was about to get much more complicated. Victoria's face had turned an interesting shade of red. "You planned this," she hissed. "You let me arrange this sale knowing you had no right to sell my mother's restaurant in the first place?" I finished. "Yes, I did. Just like you planned to sell this place out from under me before I turned 30. My father chose that moment to appear at the cellar entrance, his face a mix of shock and something else. Was it pride? "Charlie," he said softly, "the collection, your mother never told me." "She wanted to protect it," I replied. "She wanted to make sure I would always have a choice about my future, that I couldn't be forced to give up her dream." Victoria turned to him, ready to launch into one of her manipulative speeches, but he held up his hand. "No, Victoria. Enough." He looked around the cellar, then at me, really seeing me for the first time in years. "The sale is off. La Maison stays in the family, just like Catherine wanted." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of change. Victoria moved out, unable to face the embarrassment of her failed scheme. My father, as if waking from a long sleep, began spending time at the restaurant again, rekindling his love for the business he and my mother had built together. La Maison's wine collection, now properly valued and insured, became the talk of the culinary world. Wine enthusiasts and collectors began making reservations months in advance, hoping to sample rare vintages that we carefully released from the collection. One evening, as I sat at the bar after closing, Sophie brought out a bottle from the secret cellar, a 1982 Bordeaux that had been my mother's favorite. "Your mom would be proud," she said, pouring 2 glasses, "not just of saving the restaurant, but of how you did it. You protected her legacy while creating your own." I took a sip, letting the complex flavors remind me of all the wine tastings my mother had hosted, all the knowledge she'd passed down. "You know what's funny?" I said. Victoria thought she was so clever, trying to sell a failing restaurant. She never understood that the real value of this place isn't in the building or even in the wine. It's in the memories, the passion, the love that goes into every meal and every bottle we serve. My father joined us, looking more like his old self than he had in years. Your mother used to say that a great restaurant was like a great wine. It gets better with age, but only if you respect its history while allowing it to evolve. He raised his glass. To Catherine, who knew exactly what she was doing when she created that secret cellar. And to you, Charlie, for being every bit as clever and determined as she was. As we toasted, I looked around at the restaurant, at the staff cleaning up, at the paintings on the walls, at the warmth and character that no trendy fusion place could ever replicate. Victoria had tried to reduce it all to numbers on a spreadsheet, but she had failed to understand the most important lesson my mother ever taught me. Some things are worth more than money. Some things can't be bought or sold. Some things, like love and legacy and the perfect glass of wine, only grow more valuable with time. La Maison didn't just survive, it thrived. We maintained our traditional French cuisine while carefully innovating, just as my mother would have wanted. The secret wine cellar became a legend in culinary circles, with select bottles occasionally offered for truly special occasions. Victoria, I heard, had moved to Miami and was trying to rebuild her real estate career. My father found his passion for the restaurant business again, mentoring young chefs and sharing stories about the early days with Mom. And me, I stood at the helm of La Maison, honoring my mother's legacy while creating my own. Every night, as I walked through the dining room, greeting guests and suggesting wine pairings, I felt her presence, not as a ghost, but as an inspiration. Because in the end, she had given me more than a restaurant or a priceless wine collection. She had given me the tools to fight for what mattered, the wisdom to wait for the right moment, and the confidence to know that sometimes the best revenge is simply proving them wrong. The sound of papers scattering across our imported marble floor echoed through our penthouse living room. I watched years of careful documentation flutter around me like expensive confetti while my husband, Michael, stood over me with that familiar look of smug superiority. "Really, Rebecca," he said, adjusting his Rolex. "You thought you could just walk into my office and accuse me of fraud? With what evidence? These?" He kicked at one of the fallen folders. "No one's going to believe the trophy wife who spends her days planning charity galas. My name is Rebecca Sterling, and at 34, I was about to destroy the man I'd been married to for 8 years. Michael saw what he wanted to see, a beautiful former model who'd given up her career to be the perfect corporate wife. What he didn't see was the economics degree from Penn, or the 2 years I'd spent in forensic accounting before meeting him. "You're right," I said, keeping my voice steady as I knelt to gather the scattered papers. "What was I thinking?" He laughed, already dismissing me as he pulled out his phone. "I have a meeting downtown. Clean this up before the housekeeper sees it. And Becca." He paused at the door. "Let's not have this conversation again. Stick to what you're good at, looking pretty and keeping my social calendar in order." The moment the elevator doors closed behind him, I stopped picking up papers and instead pulled out my phone, sending a quick text to my sister Lauren. "It's time. Meet me at the usual place in an hour." Then I walked to our bedroom, straight to my jewelry box. The antique locket that had belonged to my grandmother hung innocently among the expensive pieces Michael had given me over the years. He'd never understood why I insisted on wearing such a simple piece to important events when I had millions in diamonds at my disposal. I opened the locket now, carefully removing the tiny flash drive hidden behind the old photograph. 8 years of evidence meticulously collected and backed up, all stored in something he'd dismissed as sentimental junk. The cafe where I met Lauren was deliberately chosen, small, cash only, and far from Michael's usual haunts. My sister was already there, her laptop open and ready. "You finally confronted him," she said as I sat down, no preamble needed. "We've been planning this for months." I nodded, pulling out the flash drive. He reacted exactly as we expected. Condescending, dismissive, certain I couldn't touch him. Lauren's fingers flew across the keyboard as she began downloading the files. "Does he have any idea how long you've been watching him?" "No," I said, wrapping my hands around a cup of coffee. "He still thinks I spend my days getting manicures and planning his precious charity events." The truth was far more complex. I'd discovered Michael's fraud almost by accident 3 months into our marriage. A misfiled document, a series of numbers that didn't add up, and suddenly I'd seen behind the curtain of his real estate empire. At first, I'd been in denial. Michael Sterling was one of Boston's most respected developers, known for transforming struggling neighborhoods into luxury properties. His company, Sterling Development, was worth hundreds of millions. Surely I was misreading the documents. But then I started paying attention, really paying attention. The community improvement projects that mysteriously fell through after he'd received government grants. The historic buildings that suffered convenient accidents right after he purchased them at low prices. The string of shell companies that seemed to exist only to move money between accounts. "Look at this," Lauren said now, turning her laptop screen toward me. She'd pulled up one of Michael's recent developments, a luxury high-rise in what used to be a working-class neighborhood. The numbers don't match what he reported to the city council. He claimed the project would cost $50 million, but according to these bank transfers, he only spent $30 million. I finished. The rest disappeared into offshore accounts, and that's just one project. Lauren shook her head, her expression grim. How did he get away with this for so long? Because he's careful. He spreads the fraud across multiple projects, multiple companies. Unless you're looking at the whole picture, each discrepancy seems minor. I took another sip of coffee. Plus, he has half the city council in his pocket. Amazing what regular charitable donations can buy. My phone buzzed. A text from Michael. "Dinner with the Andersons tonight. Wear the blue versus, and be more pleasant than you were this morning." I showed the message to Lauren, who rolled her eyes. God, he's such a patronizing ass. How did you stand it for 8 years? Because I needed to be sure, I said quietly. Sure of the evidence, sure of his guilt, sure that when I finally moved against him, it would stick. The truth was, it had taken years to understand the full scope of Michael's operation. He wasn't just defrauding investors and government agencies. He was destroying communities, forcing out longtime residents so he could build luxury properties that sat half empty while he collected tax breaks. "The FBI contact is ready," Lauren said, lowering her voice even though no one was near our table. "Agent Martinez says as soon as we give him the signal, they'll move." I nodded, thinking of the careful groundwork we'd laid. The recordings hidden in Michael's home office, capturing conversations with corrupt officials. The paper trail I'd pieced together showing how he laundered money through fake renovation projects. The witness statements from former employees who'd been silenced with threats and payoffs. "What about the safety deposit boxes?" Lauren asked. "Already taken care of," I assured her. "I moved everything to the new location last week while he was in New York. Bank records, backup drives, original documents, it's all secure." My sister reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Are you sure you want to go through with this, once we pull the trigger?" "He has to be stopped," I said firmly. "You haven't seen what I've seen, Lauren. The families displaced by his developments, the small businesses forced to close, the lives he's ruined while he sits in his penthouse counting his millions." Lauren nodded, understanding in her eyes. She'd been my confidant through all of this, helping me gather evidence, providing technical support, being my sounding board when the weight of it all became too heavy. "The Anderson dinner tonight," she said thoughtfully. "That's perfect timing, actually. Half the city's power players will be there." I smiled slightly, already seeing the possibilities. Michael loved these dinners, loved holding court among Boston's elite. He'd never suspect that his perfectly coiffed wife was about to bring his entire empire crashing down. "I better go get ready then," I said, standing up. Wouldn't want to disappoint my husband by being late to his important dinner. Back at the penthouse, I took my time getting ready. The blue versus dress Michael had specified hung in my closet, a $12,000 piece of fabric that was supposed to show off his wealth and taste. I slipped it on, carefully applied my makeup, and fastened my grandmother's locket around my neck. In the mirror, I looked exactly like what Michael thought I was, the beautiful, compliant wife who knew her place. The perfect accessory to his carefully crafted image. If he'd ever bothered to really know me, he might have wondered why I always insisted on handling the seating arrangements for his business dinners. Why I volunteered to organize his charitable foundation's documents. Why I spent so much time in his home office, supposedly planning social events. But Michael saw what he wanted to see, and tonight that blindness would be his undoing. The Andersons' dining room was filled with the quiet murmur of Boston's elite when Michael and I arrived. Robert Anderson's mansion in Beacon Hill was the perfect setting for what was about to unfold. Old money, old power, and enough ego in one room to float a yacht. Rebecca, darling. Sarah Anderson air-kissed my cheeks. That dress is divine. Michael always makes sure you're the most beautiful woman in the room. I smiled, letting the backhanded compliment roll off me. You're too kind. I love what you've done with the place. The new chandelier is exquisite. As we moved through the crowd, I felt Michael's hand on my lower back, steering me towards specific groups. This was our usual dance. He'd talk business while I played the charming wife, laughing at the right moments, making sure everyone's glasses stayed full. Sterling. Commissioner Davis boomed, extending his hand to Michael. Just got the paperwork for the Riverside project. Everything looks in order. I watched Michael's face carefully as he shook the commissioner's hand. The Riverside project, his latest scheme to turn a historic waterfront neighborhood into luxury condos. The paperwork he'd submitted showed a $100 million investment. The real numbers, safely documented in my files, showed something very different. Excellent, Michael said smoothly. The city won't regret supporting this development. It'll transform the whole area. That's what we're afraid of, a quiet voice said from behind us. Elena Martinez stood there, elegant in a simple black dress. To everyone else, she was just another guest, the wife of a prominent real estate attorney. Only I knew she was actually FBI Special Agent Martinez, and this dinner was no coincidence. Michael's smile tightened slightly. Mrs. Martinez, I wasn't aware you and James would be here tonight. Sarah and I serve on a historical preservation board together. Alana said pleasantly. We're quite concerned about the fate of some of our older buildings. So many unfortunate accidents lately. I felt Michael's hand tighten on my waist. Those accidents had helped him acquire prime properties at fraction of their value, after which the historical protection orders mysteriously disappeared. Progress requires change, he said dismissively. Rebecca, why don't you get me a fresh drink? I nodded obediently and headed toward the bar, but instead of ordering, I slipped into the powder room and pulled out my phone. A text from Lauren was waiting. Teams in position. Just say the word. My hands trembled slightly as I replied, now. When I returned to the dining room, everything appeared normal. Guests were taking their seats, servers were pouring wine, and Michael was holding court at the head of the table, explaining his latest development plans to an admiring audience. I sat down beside him, accepting a glass of wine from a server. Any moment now. Right on cue, phones around the table began buzzing. I watched as people pulled them out, faces changing as they read the breaking news alerts. My God, Robert Anderson said from across the table. Michael, is this true? Michael frowned, reaching for his own phone. I saw the exact moment he read the headline. Sterling gewild under federal investigation for massive fraudulence. The color drained from his face as he scrolled through the article. The Boston Globe had done their job well, laying out years of fraudulent dealings backed by documents and witness statements. His careful house of cards was about to collapse. This is ridiculous, he sputtered, looking around the table. Obviously some sort of mistake. Is it? Elena Martinez stood up, pulling out her badge. Michael Sterling, I'm Special Agent Martinez with the FBI. We have a warrant for your arrest on multiple counts of wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. The dining room erupted in chaos as more agents entered. I sat quietly, sipping my wine as Michael was read his rights in front of Boston's most influential citizens. You? He turned to me, realization dawning in his eyes. You did this. I met his gaze calmly. No, Michael. You did this. I just made sure everyone would know about it. You stupid bitch, he snarled, lunging toward me. But agents quickly restrained him. You think you can understand my business? You're nothing but a trophy wife. I finished for him, standing up. That's what you wanted, isn't it? Someone beautiful and seemingly simple who wouldn't ask questions about where the money came from or why those historic buildings kept having convenient accidents. I reached for my locket, opening it to reveal the empty space where the flash drive had been. But you never bothered to look past the surface. Never wondered why I was so interested in handling your paperwork, organizing your files. You just assumed I was decorative, like everything else in your life. The room had gone silent, watching the scene unfold. I could see the moment it hit him, every private conversation in his office, every meeting with corrupt officials, every deal he thought was safely hidden. I'd been there, watching, documenting, building the case that would bring him down. Mrs. Sterling, Agent Martinez said formally, "We'll need you to come in tomorrow to make a formal statement." I nodded, gathering my clutch. "Of course. I have all the documentation you'll need. Bank records, property assessments, evidence of bribes. 8 years worth." 8 years. Michael's voice was barely a whisper. "You've been planning this for 8 years?" "No," I corrected him. "I've been gathering evidence for 8 years. I started planning this the day I found out you were destroying people's lives to build your empire. The day I realized that the man I married was nothing but a fraud in an expensive suit." As the agents led him away, I turned to the stunned dinner guests. "I apologize for disrupting the evening. Sarah, the salmon was lovely." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of depositions, interviews, and legal proceedings. Michael's empire began to crumble as investors pulled out and projects were halted. The evidence I'd gathered was damning, not just of him, but of numerous city officials and business partners who had enabled his schemes. Lauren helped me move out of the penthouse, into a modest but comfortable apartment far from the luxury high-rises Michael had built. "What will you do now?" she asked as we unpacked boxes. I smiled, pulling out my diploma and CPA license, things I'd kept hidden for years. "I'm thinking of starting a consulting firm, helping small businesses and community organizations protect themselves from developers like Michael. Maybe do some forensic accounting on the side." The trophy wife turning corporate watchdog, Lauren laughed. "I love it. The media had a field day with the story, of course. Sociality Bura Anges Diewund Heor UPTDVELPER made headlines across the country." But what mattered more were the other stories, the families who could return to their neighborhoods, the small businesses that would survive, the communities that would stay intact. 6 months later, I sat in a courtroom watching Michael plead guilty to multiple federal charges. He looked smaller somehow, without his expensive suits and air of invincibility. "The defendant is sentenced to 15 years in federal prison," the judge announced, and ordered to pay restitution of $400 million. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for a statement. I thought about all the times I'd stood beside Michael at press conferences, playing my part as the silent, beautiful wife. Mr. Sterling's crimes weren't just about money, I said into the microphones. They were about power, about the belief that wealth makes you untouchable. But no one is above the law, and no one should be allowed to destroy communities for profit. Later that evening, I sat in my new office, looking out over the city. My consulting firm was already gaining a reputation for helping expose corporate fraud and protecting community interests. The phone rang. Another potential client seeking help. As I reached for it, my grandmother's locket caught the light. I touched it gently, thinking of how such a small thing had helped bring down an empire. It reminded me of something my grandmother used to say: "The most dangerous weapon against evil is the truth, carried by someone everyone underestimates." Michael had built his world on lies, seeing only what he wanted to see. He'd wanted a trophy wife, so that's why I let him see, never realizing that sometimes the most effective weapon is the one hiding in plain sight.